I'm SP from Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D., a show about the general Marvel comic universe, part of the GonnaGeek network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other hilarious and fun geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to Better Podcasting. With a combined history of over 1,000 episodes, and starting as early as 2008, we are hobby podcasters through and through, just like you. That's why we are different. We minimize the money talk so that you can focus on building a better podcast. Here are the hosts for the show, Stephen Jondrew and Stargate Pioneer.
Hello and welcome to a short episode of Better Podcasting. I am Steven, and with me, of course, is the wonderful SP.
It's great to be here today, Steven. Always a pleasure to be on a podcast recording with you.
I know what you're saying right now. You're looking at your phones, your devices, and you're going, wow, the duration of this episode does seem really short. So two things on that. Number one, first off, congratulations. Congratulations that you have gotten back time away from us, and your amount of time with us has been reduced. We know it's always a good week when you have less time with SJ and SP.
Haha, that's a good one, Steven. You are such a funny person. It's one of the many reasons that I feel so privileged to be in your presence each and every week.
Aw, thank you, SP. Secondly, yes, this is just a quick update episode. This is just so you weren't wondering why there was no episode of Better Podcasting this week. We've got a little bit of podcast stuff to come, but I know that this is going to come to a complete shock to the listeners and the viewers right now. But that voice that you heard right now was not actually SP.
Wait a second, I'm not?
No, you're not really SP, no.
I don't get it. I feel like SP. For example, I really enjoy the Blue Yeti microphone and SoundCloud.
Okay, that's fair. That is a pretty spot-on SP thing, Mr. AI voice. But no, you are not. You might think you're SP, but you're not SP. I know. We all wish that we could be SP every now and then, but no, you are not SP. SP is not here with me this week. This is because we did have a bit of a situation come up. And putting all the jokes aside, I thought I'd have a little fun in the intro here. SP did actually have a family emergency that did come up the day that we were going to record this. If you want to go to our Discord at betterpodcasting.com/Discord, he has shared all of the details in there. It was a situation with his dad. As of when I record this now, sounds like his dad is on the mend, but I won't share any more of the details in there. I don't want to get him wrong, but he did put all the information in there if you would like to check that out. We're not really sure, if I'm being honest, when we're going to record the 250th episode of Better Podcasting. This is something that we were going to do this week, but I don't know. We still have to connect. I told SP, focus on your family. Let's get through that, and we'll figure out what we're going to do with the Better Podcasting recording episode. So it might impact this and the Better Podcasting live chat, but just keep our eyes on social media. We will announce what we're going to do once we've got that. There is a chance we might end up just skipping this week altogether, so it will be a couple weeks till we have that episode. But again, SP is focusing on the things that are important to focus on right now, which is his family. So we will communicate behind the scenes and then let all of you know through social media what the release schedule will look like over the next couple weeks. So I know behind the scenes, SP, I've said this to you a couple of times, but I do want to just say, because I know you're listening to this, I want to say my thoughts are with you and your family, and I do wish your dad a speedy recovery. But again, I did say here, we're going to get a little bit of podcast information in here. I had to at least fit a bit of podcast stuff in this quick update episode. So I'm going to go and do a special condensed version of the Better Podback right now.
This is where we here at Better Podcasting turn the show over to you as we run through some of your feedback. We call this segment Better Podback.
All right, there was a couple of big news stories that came out this week, and so I thought, why not combine the two? Anchor this week announced, on the heels of Apple Podcasts announcing paid subscriptions, that yes, Anchor is going to get into the paid subscription market. They're going to start offering that on Anchor. Also, there ended up being a news article that came out that Facebook is getting into the podcast player game. Now, you're probably saying, okay, yeah, I've already heard of this. This is Spotify. Spotify has gone and made a player for Facebook. That's what it is, right? No, that's not the case. It's a separate thing that apparently Facebook is working on as a separate podcast player. So these are kind of a couple big news stories that came out and were discussed in our Discord this week. So I thought, let's go ahead and turn it into a poll and ask the question, which story do you think was the bigger of the past week? Facebook working on their own podcast player, brackets, in addition to the Spotify rollout, end bracket, or that yet another company, bracket Anchor, end bracket, is going the paid subscription route. And why do you think that it is the bigger story? So I posted this on Twitter, and on Twitter, we had people respond, and it ended up being 44.4% for paid subscription fees, which means yes, at 55.6%, people thought the Facebook player was the bigger news story from this past week. And let's just run down a bit of news, or a bit of responses, I should say, to that question. On Twitter, we had Diami Balaki respond, and he said you know what? Why don't I turn this over to you, SP?
Honestly, I'm afraid they're both bad news for open podcasting.
Yes, that's what Diami Polaki said. Thank you, SP, for reading that out. Yes, he says he is afraid that they're both bad news for open podcasting. This is kind of a common theme here. We also had John S. Badger respond, and he did post this in our Discord over at betterpodcasting.com, and he said, quote, "Personally, as an Anchor user, I still think the Facebook/Spotify and Facebook podcast news top the chart to me. I highly doubt enough listeners will make the Anchor platform viable due to it being yet another place to put your credit card info. Facebook, on the other hand, has 2.8 billion users. Many of those have no idea what a podcast is. This likely brings the concept to the average user. Unless they tuck podcasting into that page with every other app imaginable, getting the needle lost in a stack of needles. That could prove nearly invisible to Facebook users." Okay, so let's just talk briefly about this response here, because I think that's an interesting concept that Facebook could put this into a weird corner on Facebook. I think that potentially this also could really shift what people are defining as a podcast for the thing that John S. Badger just mentioned in there, is that many of those users have no idea what a podcast is. So if this is the case, and let's hypothetically say that the Facebook podcast player does end up being a success, well, it's going to be played through Facebook. And is that going to be a different feel than what current podcast listeners have? And if those new people, those new section of the 2.8 billion users end up finding a podcast through Facebook, then that's going to be the impression they're going to have of what a podcast is. So I think that's really interesting to think about those 2 points in John S. Badger's response. Thanks for sending that, John. We also had quite a long one here from Damien the DM, so I'll go ahead and read it all out. This was also on our Discord server, which again, these are the kind of conversations you miss by not being in our Discord server. Damien said, well, to start off with answering the question, I am going to have to say that I think Facebook building a native player is much bigger or impactful than yet another company adding in the ability to do paid subscriptions. Paid subscriptions are nothing new in the podcast space, nor are ways for us as podcasters to monetize through our fan base with things like membership clubs. With Apple officially announcing that they are going to allow paid subscriptions, I am not at all surprised that every other company in the podcast space is jumping to get their own version rolling out to the public. Apple doing it is normalizing something that many other companies and platforms have offered in the past. But since Apple is still number one, this is normalizing it and bringing it out to a much wider audience, and I am sure it will be more accepted than it has been as a result of this. The Facebook news, on the other hand, I think this is big because of the nature of Facebook and an infinitely scrolling newsfeed. Very few people want to stop and sit on a single item in their news feeds for an extended period of time. I think it has been a couple of years now, but Facebook knows this. And this is why if you're watching a video through Facebook, it will now minimize and go to the bottom corner of the screen. This allows you to keep scrolling, see the video, and also have control over the video. Seeing this supported for, I am guessing, audio, since this is about podcasting, should allow similar functionality. Not knowing the full details of the rollout, I am seeing this working for things like opening up an episode from someone's podcast page to check them out, while continuing to go about their day on Facebook. What I am really curious to see is if the player will work across different platforms and devices. Can I start an episode on desktop but resume it on phone when I'm on the go? Also, if they are adding in a native player, it seems like they are more officially supporting podcasts, so hopefully it will make it easier and more impactful for us to share our shows on Facebook with its hundreds of millions, brackets billions, question mark, and bracket of users. So a lot of to unpack there in Damien's response. And I want to just highlight the area specifically about the player and the way that it could minimize, as well as the second part to that. I think he brings up a really good point about the video aspect of that. When they first started making it so it would scroll, it took me by surprise, and I had to get used to how that operated, because I used to go and scroll or go into a video, press play, and then scroll, and I wouldn't see the video anymore. So it was kind of like it was there, but it wasn't there. And then this popped up, and now it was taking up the lower right corner of the screen. With a bit of time, I personally found that this was super helpful because of exactly what he said. I could continue on my Facebook activities while still glancing at that video and controlling it as I needed. With the podcast aspect, I think that this could be the same idea, especially because podcasts can sometimes be quite long and might even be a little bit better because, like I said, with the video, I had to glance at it. With the audio is meant to be heard. And so if someone's reading and having this in the background, I think it might work a little bit better than video. As far as the continuing on the mobile, that's another question that I was wondering, because quite honestly, I think that the video experience on a mobile device on Facebook is quite different than one on desktop, especially when you look at someone hitting the web page through, hitting Facebook through the web page rather than the app on the mobile. They're quite different experiences. So I'm curious to see what they do there. And also with the continuing aspect, will there be a little area there that you can go continue on? Because right now, videos that you've watched or videos that you saved or whatever it is that you have the control of videos in there, it's not easy to pick up and continue on in any platform. I know whenever I've saved a video, I have to go hunting for where it's saved. So I'm interested to see what comes of this. And of course, the other aspect of what will they do to make money off of it. But that's another conversation that's not related to Damien's feedback. Last couple things I just want to throw in here before I wrap up this episode is related to both of these. We had a few comments leading up to this question, and this is why I decided to pose this question, was because we had a little bit of back and forth. And one of the ones that was in there was from Yakko, and he said, "This is horrible for the podcaster, in my opinion. I'm not going to be setting up all these apps to accept money, then have to manage perks on each platform. Patreon and PayPal still work fine for me." This was in relation to the whole Anchor adding paid subscriptions. As well, Damien actually had another piece of feedback in there, or comment, whatever you want to call it. And he said, "Did all of these companies get together behind the scenes and plan this? Or is everyone else just being very reactionary to Apple so they don't get to grab everyone up by default again?" So I think that this is a lot to think about as far as the whole Anchor thing, because as was mentioned by a couple of people, there's more people involved in this. There's not just Anchor, not just Apple. And there's been companies that have been doing things like this for a while, but there's going to probably be a big push going forward now that Apple's getting into the paid subscription game. On the news of Facebook, Randy ended up posting, "Are these two stories not the same thing? WTF Facebook." And what this was in response to was in our Discord server, we had Randy post news of the Spotify player on Facebook coming, and then Chris Farrell immediately posted the Facebook podcast player. So it was just pretty funny that both stories kind of came out the same day. And in our Discord, both of them were back to back. And at first glance, you might think they were the same thing because there was so much apparent overlap. But no, they were very different story, different situations. And actually, Alarun, I think, summarized it best. Spotify isn't just podcasts, though. In fact, I would bet the majority of Facebook users would use it for music over podcasts. And I think this is a really good point that he makes there, is the Spotify player is apparently for music and podcasts. And so the focus is probably going to be on music because likely a lot of people who use Spotify, or maybe arguably the majority of people who use Spotify, use it for music. So there might not be the finessing towards podcasts in that player. And maybe that's why Facebook is coming in with the player. As well, my personal theory, they don't want to share that cut with Spotify if they're able to monetize podcasts. But again, that's not in relation to the direct feedback that we had there. So that's kind of running down some of the feedback that we got about these couple news stories this week. We would love to know, what are your thoughts on these two news stories? I suspect we'll probably touch base on one or both of these, maybe on the official 250th episode of Better Podcasting. I'm sure SP has some thoughts about this, but for now, we will leave it there. And you can come to betterpodcasting.com/Discord. You can hit us up at twitter.com/betterpod. Email us to podcast@betterpodcasting.com. And as a reminder, we do have a video companion to this show. So we would love to have you send us a video clip. And again, our Discord has all of these sort of conversations happening in between our episodes. So that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for episode 249A of Better Podcasting. I'm Stephen Jondrew saying, SP, you gotta come back and save our listeners from hearing another Stephen solo cast. I'm sorry, listeners.
And I'm apparently not SP, but it's okay to admit that I had you fooled for a minute. Didn't I?
Bye.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Better Podcasting. You can find the full back catalog of Better Podcasting at betterpodcasting.com. If you're into geeky podcasts, please check out the other podcasts on the GonnaGeek Network at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This show was produced and edited by Stephen Jondrew of GonnaGeek Productions. Voice work was done by L.W. Salinas. Thanks again for listening or watching, and we hope to see you again next week.